Well, I just want to believe that you've been doing very well. My name is John Kimani. This is Online Classroom, and today we shall be asking ourselves what leadership lessons can we pick from what we call the New Testament? What leadership lessons can we pick from the New Testament? Let's begin by maybe recording some of the key characters that we actually see in the New Testament. Now we begin with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ himself. We can define Jesus Christ as the greatest leader of all leaders. Jesus Christ can be defined as the greatest leader of all leaders. Right? Number two, the second characters, of course, is a group of them, are the disciples, the 12 disciples that Jesus Christ had. Of course, we had Peter, we had the sons of Zebedee, we had Thomas, who was doubting, and Judas Iscariot. We have a whole host of those disciples. What leadership lessons can they teach us? So we have Jesus Christ, we have the 12 disciples, and then that will actually do for the Gospels. So the third characters that we can look at is in particular Peter. We have some interest in Peter because of course we know Peter in particular of the disciples was the one that was actually entrusted with the leadership, because Jesus said, now that you know who I am, I will name you Peter from Simon, and on you I will build the church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. So we in this lesson we will have some interest talking about Peter. Then of course the other person that we'll talk about is the early church. In particular, we also want to talk about Paul. We'll talk about Paul and the many churches that he began, the many churches that he founded. We may not really go into details. We'll just offer a summary of those lessons that we glean from there. Then, of course, we'll talk about the leadership lessons that we pick from the book of Revelation. Are there any leadership lessons that we pick from there? But before we jump in, the whole message of the New Testament actually is all about Christ. Christ is the primary character. And John Maxwell actually said, I don't know whether it's John Maxwell, yes it is, or I don't know, but somebody said this, that Christ, I hope you're writing, Christ did not use his leadership to gain power. Christ did not use his leadership to gain power, position, or popularity. We take that again. Christ did not use his leadership to gain power, position, or popularity. I need you to look at those 3 P's that are actually underlined, that are actually named there. Power. Today is about power. If you don't have power to move things, to order things, then you don't want that kind of leadership. Position. Look at the grammar for positions. What title are you going to give to me? It has to do, and the ranks. Position has to do with the ranks. Who is higher, who is lower? Number 1, number 2, number 3. And then popularity, the trend. Are you known? How famous are you? When you go in a meeting, do you attract? Do people clap for you? Do they give you a standing ovation? And so this author actually says Christ did not use his leadership to gain power, position, or popularity. That is very, very important for us to be able to do. But let's do a small introduction of the New Testament, just in case of those people that do not know. Now, we need to say that the New Testament has 27 books. The New Testament has 27 books. The New Testament has 27 books. And actually, it is divided into 4 parts. It's divided into 4 parts. New Testament is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is the Gospels. The Gospels are actually divided into, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. There are 4 Gospels. Right? Then, and if anybody would ask you what the Gospels talks about, we can simply say it simply talks about the life, the lessons, the teachings, if you like, the principles of Jesus Christ. The Gospel simply talks about the life and the teachings, the ministry. Some people would say it talks about the man, the message, and the mission of Jesus Christ. Okay? That will be very interesting. Okay? So the man, the mission, and the message. And some people would ask, why 4 Gospels? The answer is very simple. Why 4 Gospels? The answer is very simple. Because each of the Gospel writers gave a completely different perspective about Jesus Christ. So in other words, we have a very complete, a very a complete story about Jesus Christ. Because the way Mark presented, of course, Mark presented the Gospel to the Gentiles. When you look at Luke, Luke wrote a detailed account. He was a historian. When you look at Matthew, Matthew simply talks about anything that Jesus said about the kingdom. John was, which is also completely different from the other Gospels. So each and every Gospel writer wrote from a different perspective. And since this is not a theology class, we will not actually dwell too much on that. I think that is enough. Then we have the historical book. The historical book. The historical book. The historical book is only the Acts of Apostles. It was written by Dr. Luke. It was written by Dr. Luke. Okay? And actually, we can simply say that the book of Acts is simply an explanation of how the early church began. How the early church began. Okay? Simply explains how the early church began. So for some people, they say it explains how the church began from, of course, when Jesus Christ was ascending, he says, go to the whole world. So the book of Acts actually says how the gospel went to the world of that time. It just shows how the disciples were loyal in taking the gospel and some of the challenges that the early church went through. Of course, we know there was persecution. So there are leadership lessons that we can pick from that book, the book of the Acts of Apostles. Then we have the epistles of Paul, the epistles of Paul. And when we use the word apostles, we are simply saying they were letters. These were letters that were written by Paul himself to the churches that he founded. These letters were of practical of nature, because they wanted to help the churches that Paul had founded to be able to withstand or to be able to deal with specific issues that they were going through. A good example worth quoting is both 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. The whole issue of immaturity, the whole issue of leadership, the whole issue of idolatry. So, if you look at the epistles, more so of Pauline, those that were written by Paul, you would see that they are practical in nature, although some are doctrinal. And a good example that is worth quoting is Roman. But again, even as you look at Roman is both practical and doctrinal, where he gives a teaching, but at the tail end he also gives a practical application of the doctrine. So again, there are lessons, there are leadership lessons that we can glean from Paul. But again, then within the epistles, then there is what we call general epistles. The examples of such epistles are the ones like written by James, Peter, Jude. And the reason why we call them general is because they were not necessarily written to a particular audience. They are general because they were not necessarily written by to a particular audience. Again, we combine them because they were written by Peter, James, and Jude, just to say these are general writers. Okay. Then finally we have a prophetic book. The prophetic book. The prophetic book is only one, and it's the book of Revelation. And this is a record. Actually, this is a record of the vision that Apostle John received while at the island of Patmos. Why had he gone there? You think he had gone there for fun? You are wrong. He had gone there because of persecution. And again, there are leadership lessons that we can glean from this book of Revelation. Okay? So maybe the closing thought we can say is that the book New Testament was written in Greek. New Testament was written in Greek. New Testament was written in Greek. Was written in Greek. That is very important. So let's begin, and I don't know how much time we have, but let's ask ourselves, because it is very important for us to ask ourselves, why do we need to talk about leadership lessons and more from New Testament? Why do we need to talk about leadership lessons and more so from New Testament? And I need you to follow, because this is the personal motivations that is making me to bring these lessons to you. Why are we talking about leadership lessons from the New Testament? What are the personal motivations? What are the key drives that I have that is driving me to be able to offer these lessons to you? Number one is that I believe strongly that Christ is the best of the best. He is the best leader. Christ is the best leader. Christ is the best leader. And how was he the best? He is the example of servant leadership. He is the example of servant leadership. If you lash with us from to Matthew chapter 20, verse number 26, all the way to 28, you see Jesus Christ actually giving some insight. He says, but don't act like them. If you want to be great, this is Christ talking. If you want to be great, you must be the servant of all others. If you want to be first, you must be the slave of the rest. The Son of Man did not come to be a slave master, but a slave who will give his life to rescue many people. So Jesus Christ actually demonstrates and talks about servant leadership, and we need to study. We need to study leadership lessons from New Testament, because it actually talks about servant leadership. Of late, what we are having today are leaders that are proud, leaders that actually force themselves on people, leaders who don't act like servants but actually are bossy. They are colonial, they are harsh, they are rude, they are distant. Now, have you not noticed your local MP and your local MCA and your local governor? What have they done? During the campaign time, if you agree with me, is that they would come even to your village. They would even call you and ask them to vote them in. What about these days? They have tainted their cars. They don't even live within the neighborhood. If you try to call the number that they were using to call you when they were asking for the votes, they are no longer interested. They cannot even pick it up. And they are not even cutting the image of a servant leader. And so for us, it is very important, because to talk about leadership lessons from the New Testament, so such that we can be able to pick examples of servant leaders. And servant leaders are not necessarily demonstrated by Christ, but they are also demonstrated by a guy like Paul. Look at him, that he was more than willing to do tent maker than force the churches to be able to pay for his upkeep. Look at him. He was a tent maker. A good example of servant leadership. Look at John, the one who wrote the book of Revelation. He goes all the way to island of Patmos. He was willing to suffer there. Again, a classic example of a servant leader. And again, if you look at Herod, a key prayer during the birth of Jesus Christ and his life, look at him. He was so arrogant, and a poor decision maker. Look at Pilate, who lacked servant leadership. Look at Mary, a classic example of servant leadership. And so New Testament is filled with examples, both negative and positive, of servant leadership. And one of the leadership styles that actually, if you want to make a leadership impact, if you are willing to be able to make a leadership impact in your leadership, and if you want to leave a legacy, if you want people to follow you and to obey you and to believe in what you're telling them and to leave a legacy into their lives, then it is paramount that you embrace servant leadership. A while ago, I believe in 2016, 2015, around November, Pope Francis came to Kenya. And one article that is written, let's run from Pope Francis, the importance of servant leadership. The pontiff, when he came to this country, he is at the pinnacle of power. He is the world leader. His church, quote unquote, is the biggest, the largest in the world. He has the largest following. There are more Catholics than they are Protestant. Yet, even at the pinnacle of power, the most interesting thing is that he still remained humble instead of focusing to the ideals of the higher office. Now, take down, the Pope is a world leader, not a local leader. He's not even a president of a country. In Rome, it is said he has a city. And it is said that for Pope Francis, instead of going to the nice places that is been allocated for him, he went into the low places. When he came here, instead of riding into those high machines, what did he chose a very simple car, Honda Pilot, that is worth less than $1 million. Look at him, very, very humble. In a culture that promotes self-promotion and self-preservation, Pope, just like Jesus, teaches us about humility, taking doing the little things. Okay? So if you ask me, why do you want us to study leadership lessons from New Testament? I'll tell you, because it talks about Jesus, and Jesus is the best example of leaders, of servant leadership. Number 2, we shall learn about vision. Vision. Ask Paul, he had a vision. Ask Jesus, he had a vision. Ask Peter, he had a vision. Ask John, he had a vision. In the world today, we cannot underestimate the value, the need for leadership. Vision. Vision, it is the future. It is the ability to see future today. If you don't have a vision, then you don't have direction. You don't have a strategy. Come on. If you don't, the reason why our politicians are not taking us anywhere is because they don't have a vision. Because it is from a vision that you are able to scale it down to have a strategy. When you don't have a strategy, then you don't have a skill. You don't have a passion. When you don't have a strategy, when you don't have a passion, then this gives rise to corruption. Why don't don't I remind you a story one day when Jesus Christ was told, Jesus, people are looking for you. He had gone out there and he was praying. And so the disciples come and tell, hey, Jesus, they are looking for you. He says, listen, I must also go and look for other people. Look at the woman, the Canaanite woman, when she came begging Jesus Christ to heal her. Jesus says, I did not come to people like you. I came to the sheep of Israel. The necessity of vision is threefold. Number one, it helps you to stick. If you don't like it, you can say it gives you stickability. I don't know whether there is such a word. It gives you stickability. You are able to stick within the timelines, within the parameters, within the boundaries that you've been given. Jesus said, the Son of Man came to save that which was lost. So he went looking for the lost people. That's why he went looking for Zacchaeus. When he found Zacchaeus on top of a tree, he said, hey, Zacchaeus, I am stopping here and I'm actually getting into your house. Yes, I know you are a tax collector. And I know my people don't like tax collectors, but guess what? I am sticking in your house and I'm going to eat with you, because Jesus Christ knew the vision. So vision gives you stickability. The reason why people are digressing, jumping up and down from one end to the other is because they don't have a vision. When politicians lack a vision, and by the way, it's not just a vision that is verbalized, but a vision that consumes them, then the way they will still continue rooting this country, and they will still be moving up and down and doing things that actually anger us instead of doing the primary things. So vision gives you stickability. Number two, vision gives you discipline. Vision gives you discipline. At least you know what you're supposed to do. You're not easily digressed. You don't just do things for the sake of doing. We said it previously, and I remember in an earlier lesson, I don't know whether we were talking about what, but there's a lesson we were saying that Jesus' program was people driven, not program oriented. Jesus' program was people oriented, not project oriented. In other words, it rotated around people. He did what, when people had a need, he stopped. Jesus was not jumping from a program to another program. Actually, Jesus Christ his program was rotating around people. Classic example. Do you remember a time when Jairus came begging him and telling him, Jesus, kasichana kangu kameenda, kamekufa. Then along the way as he is moving, then there is this woman who had a problem with 12 years of bleeding. She touches her garment, and Jesus stops and says, who have actually stopped? That's why Jesus Christ had room for interruption. And the reason why he had the time for interruption is because his program was people oriented, not program oriented. One of the things that you're going to learn as we study about Jesus Christ, and as we study and more about gospel, is that we shall be able to see, and we shall be challenged that our program needs to be people oriented, because people are our greatest raw material. Hello? Yeah, not programs. If you have the wrong people, then whether you're the best program, they're going to run down your programs. Is it not making sense? So the reason why I'm bringing this to you is because it's going to teach us about vision. And vision, we've said it gives you, number one, it gives you stickability, it gives you discipline. Number three, you're able, you know when you achieve it. You know when you achieve it. When you accomplish your vision, you are able to know. And you can be able to tell how far are you from vision. And actually it makes easy when you have a vision. You're able to hand over to the other person and tell him, okay, towards this vision, I have reached this point. In Kenya, we have what we call 2030 vision. So it is very easy. It was birthed by the late President Kibaki. So when Kibaki was signing off, he was able to tell the incoming president, by then it was President Uhuru Kenyatta, tell him, Vision 2030, this is the further I've reached. I'm very sure by the time he was leaving, President Kenyatta must have also told the incumbent, that is President Ruto, this is the further I've reached with this vision. So it makes it easy. It makes it easy to know, to measure it, and even to transfer it, to pass it on. Jesus Christ left a vision. Go to the whole world. That's the vision. Look at it. It has been passed to us. After we leave by the moment we exit this world, we are going to pass it down to our sons. Our sons, they will pass it down to their own sons or their own daughters. So, personal motivation number 2 that is making me to bring this lesson is the whole aspect of vision. Because New Testament talks about vision, and vision are very important. People have suffered for the vision. Okay? And then maybe number 3, so that we reach it there. New Testament gives a lot of illustrations on commitment. We have examples of commitment. Commitment, if you ask me, I'll tell you it is there. It is ability to finish things. Commitment is the ability to finish things. Christ came, he was committed, he completed things. Paul came, he suffered, he completed things. Peter came, he suffered, he completed. In other words, we are saying, commitment simply says it is better to finish rather than start. A lot of people are starters, but they are not finishers. And we also say this, that incompleteness haunts you. Incompleteness haunts you. Jesus was a finisher. Don't you remember him saying, everything is done, it's finished? In Greek it says, tetelestai, it is finished. Look at Paul. If you're doubting whether he was not a finisher, he says in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 7, I have fought well, I have finished the race. And when we study the books through the New Testament, we shall be able even to learn how we can finish well as leaders. Because it is not how great you start, but how you finish. And we shall be able to interrogate the current leaders and see whether whether they finish well or whether they start well. If you look at the last administration, they began very well, but their finish was very poor. Okay, maybe the final one. Teachers always say the final one, but I think personal motivation number 4 that we can bring from here is that there is sacrifice. The whole lesson of sacrifice. Jesus in Matthew 10:39 says, if you try to save your life, you will lose it. If you give it up, you will gain it. Leadership in New Testament talks about you need to give up. We're living in a culture of grabbing power, grabbing money, grabbing everything. But New Testament gives us examples of sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed. Peter sacrificed. Paul sacrificed. John sacrificed. The women financiers sacrificed. It's all about sacrifice. What you give up to go up And by the way, I just want you to look at me. If you look at my hands at the moment, when you are here, you are the leader at the peak. Your rights, your privileges are small. The person who is right here at the base has a lot of rights and responsibilities. But as you climb up leadership, your rights and your rights are smaller, and you pay a higher price. Sacrifice is about the price that we pay for leadership. It has nothing to do with perks. It has everything to do with the price that you pay. When things go wrong, you are criticized. You bear the brunt of criticism. Because as John Maxwell actually says, everything rises and falls on leadership. You see, in John 15:13, Jesus said, the greatest way to show love for friends is to die for them. The greatest way to show love for friends is to die for them. The greatest way to show Kenyans that you love them is to slice your salary, is to be available for them. Don't you remember one day Jesus' parents and brothers actually came looking for him? And what did they say? We are taking you home. Because you are jumping up and down, you don't even have time to eat. They even thought that he is crazy. So if you ask me why we want to offer this lesson for you, it's an example of sacrifice, and I think leaders need to sacrifice their time, their money. I believe is also challenging our commitment level, and we need to start that which we finish. Again, we also need to talk about the vision. That the vision gives us stickability, and then we also said that it also talks about Jesus, who was the greatest leader. Now, I want to believe that you are doing very well, and thank you very much for giving us this lesson. My name is John Kimani, and until next week, I want to believe that that lesson has been helpful. Why don't you, there are numbers that are passing through your screens, please apply them so that we can continue learning with you. This is Marketplace Believers, an online platform that engages, equips, and encourages believers to say inawezekana. Until next week,